let me introduce you to the next project in WoodTech, and that is the Jewelery Box project, otherwise known as the Dresser Valet. So I consider this a fine woodworking project for a couple of reasons. So first of all, this is going to be one of the most challenging projects that we've done so far. It's going to take us the longest amount of time. There's lots of parts and pieces to this project. This is just a basic box to start with, but you'll see what's going to happen is we're going to add some features to the box to make it look really, really pretty special. So another thing that we're going to do with this project that I would consider making it the fine woodworking category is that we're using hardwood lumber. Okay, so we've used hardwood lumber before for the cutting board and actually for the amazing folding table. But here we're going to use, it's going to be your choice of lumber. You know, the box right here, this one's oak. You could use black walnut. So this lumber is more expensive than other lumber. It's got nice different colors to it, some nice grain patterns. But you know from working with wood is that the end grain is always a problem. Okay, that's hard to sand. It burns easy. It tears out when you're working with it. And so in general, it's just not pretty to look at either. So in this project, what we want to do is we want to hide that end grain. So it makes the project a little more complex because we're hiding the end grain. You'll see in here we don't have any end grain exposed because what we've done is we've cut the boards on angles. We've made miter cuts, okay, on the miter saw, and we've glued this whole project together so that you don't see any of the end grain. So another aspect that makes this a fine woodworking project. And another aspect for now that makes this a fine woodworking project is this beautiful grain pattern on the lumber. And you can see here we've got some darker strips, darker stripes, wavy stripes in the project. And look at this. We've taken the time so that we've lined it up so that these stripes kind of just wrap right around the board. Okay, so again, another aspect that makes it a fine woodworking project. All right, so let's get going on this project. We're going to make a box that's 11 inches long, going to be 8 inches wide, and it's going to be 4 inches tall. So how do we go about accomplishing that task? First of all, I've got a little sketch here. We're going to work with this sketch. Sorry for making you dizzy on that. So what I'm looking at here, this is a big board, okay? So I got a big board. This is actually a small board. And then what happens, that view is this view. And then I'm going to tip it up on edge, and now I'm looking at the edge. So this represents the face of the board, and this represents the edge of the board. And you can see that, you know, if the board was 50 inches long, well, it's 50 inches long up here also. All right, so I gave you some measurements from the board. I said, or the project, I said, let's say we'll call this the left side. The left side was 8 inches long. The front was 11. The right side was 8. And then the back was 11. I said that it was going to be 4 inches tall. So we better label that here. 4 inches tall. And I just want to point out, here's our miters, right? Our angles, our 45-degree angles here. And to get the grain to wrap around, we need to label our parts and pieces this way. We're going to lay it out this way. And all the red marks we're actually going to lay out, we're going to draw on your board. The green marks are just the dimensions. I just want to point this out, that we're probably going to need like a 1/2 inch extra space over here in the end. And we'll need like a 1/2 inch extra space here and a 1/2 inch extra space there, maybe a 1/2 there and a 1/2 there. All right, so we're starting to see how big this board is going to be. So you can see here we've got 8 plus 11 plus 8 more plus 11 more. That's say about 38. There's 39. There's 40. Let's do this. Let's say we're going to cut a board about 41 inches long. Okay, so this could be one of our first steps. Is you're going to go ahead. You're going to pick out some nice hardwood lumber. You're going to go ahead and pick out the species. All right, and so step number 1 is going to be to rough to length. And we're going to go ahead and do that on the miter saw. All right, and how long we're going to make this? We just said let's go ahead and make it about 41 inches long. Let me just point something out. I'm going to slide a board over here. So we've got this big board. The first thing I want to point out is you have to inspect the board before you go cutting. Right here, this is a defect in the board. If you remember when we first talked about lumber, this right here is what we call a split or a check. And you're going to go ahead, you're going to see that on the ends of some of the boards. So first of all, right, we can't count this in our 41 inches. So what I would do is, the first thing I would do is I'd just go ahead and I'd cut that chunk right off. Okay, so I'm going to cut that chunk off, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from here. I'm going to measure 41 inches over, and I'm going to go ahead and make that cut. You also want to look at, you know, areas like this. We know that we can joint the board and we can get rid of stuff like this, but look for knots. You know, if this board had a knot, you probably don't want to include that in a fine woodworking project. Okay, so say we got a board that's 41 inches long that was S2S, meaning it was only surfaced on the 2 faces. We have some uneven edges. So step number 2, you know it, we joint, all right, joint edge. We're going to use the jointer. Okay, and I always like to say 1 edge only. And this is a longer board, so now what we want to do is we want to make sure the crown is up. Crown goes up. All right, so we've got a board that's about the right length. We've got 1 edge jointed. So step number 3 is we're going to go ahead and we're going to rip it to width. Rip to width. Okay, we do our ripping on the table saw. And we want it to be 4 inches wide. So I'm going to do 4 inches. Once we do that, step 4, okay, we're going to square ends. Square ends. We're doing that on the miter saw. All right, and I just say a sliver cut off of each end. So a sliver cut off of each end. And now what we should have is we should have a board that is square. That's, you know, probably a little bit less than 41 inches at this point. Step number 5 is to lay out miters. Okay, so to lay out the miters, we're going to use some kind of square. We're going to use a pencil. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. All right, so I've got my board all squared up. It's the proper size. So the first thing I want to do So we're going to go back to this sketch here. And you can see over here, we're going to make this red line. It's about a ½ inch away from the edge. This is something that you really don't even need to measure, right? So I know that right there is about a ½ inch. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to use my speed square. Of course, my speed square is locked on there. So now I know that this, right, that angle right there is 90 degrees. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to measure over 8 inches. So I got my 0 point lined up. There is 8. I hook my speed square on. And I go ahead and I trace that line. And now you'll see we got another space right here, about a ½ inch. So it's something I don't even really need to measure. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to say that's about a ½ inch. And I make another line. And now I need to lay out 11 inches for the front. So there's my 11. I go ahead and I put my mark down. I hook on my speed square. And then we're going to have another, say, ½ inch space. That's a little smaller than the ½ inch, but I think that'll be all right. And now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to lay out my 8 inches. So just like everything else, it's a fine woodworking project. We're going to take our time. These measurements are really critical, really crucial. What we need is you to do a really good job of accurately measuring and laying out this project. Again, I got another space right here. And finally, we need another 11-inch layout. Put my mark at the end of the board, use my square, I line that up nice. Go ahead. All right. So again, it's absolutely imperative that we have matching pairs. So the left side and the right side have to be exactly the same length. I want them to be 8, but if one was 7.5 and one was 8, that's no good. If they're both 7.5, we can still live with that. We need to have some accurate measurements. Same with the front and the back. We're saying that they're supposed to be 11. We want them to both be exactly the same. If they're a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, it's not the end of the world, but we need them to be exactly the same. So what I'm going to do here, though, is I've got where the line meets the top. I just kind of take my pencil and I just kind of stretch that over, continue that over onto the top edge. So you can see here now I've got that spot right there. So you can keep an eye on that spot. It is right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my speed square, right? I actually hook it onto the edge, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this speed square. I'm going to slide it up until it hits that point. All right. So I go ahead and I slide, and right there. All right, right there I can see it just touching that little spot. And as a matter of fact, if I tip this over, you can see here the end of the speed square lines up with that line. And what I'm going to do is I make my first layout, my first miter. And so I'm going to say that is pointing in. Okay, so you can see here it's pointing in. And now I actually have to flip the speed square over. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing right here. All right, so you can see I'm going to follow this line up, and then it angles in again. And we're going to go ahead and continue doing that. I just rolled my speed square over again. And I'm going to continue this process. I'm just transferring these marks up. Keep on going. Last miter. So just to come back out and see what I've got, right? This is going to be my left, and the top of the board is up there. This is my front, and the top of the board is up there. This is going to be the right side of the box. That's the top. And this is going to be the back of the box, and that is up. And also, what I want you to do is we'll say left. Let's label this left. There's the front. Here's the right side of the box. And here is the back of the box. And we're going to cut these in pieces in a second here, so you should probably put your name on it. Put your name right there. Name goes on every single part. And name again. All right, so that brings us up to step number 5, our first 5 steps for the jewelry box, aka dresser valet. Step 6, actually we'll call this step 5, continue the layout. We said square, pencil, we had a ruler. All right, and then I'm going to do this. I'm not even going to call the step. I'm going to put some asterisks here to draw your attention. Okay, and it's going to be show me the layout. All right, me as your instructor. Show me the layout. I want to make sure the layout is correct before we proceed to the next step. So I've included the process planning worksheet in the assignment. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to fill in your process planning worksheet with these first 5 steps.